Alright, so now that the bind off is all done, and both the front and the back are done, now I still have a neckline to contend with, but before I make a decision on precisely what I'm doing with that neckline, because I've never knit this before, I want to go ahead and block this and seam the sides so that I can decide two things. Do I want to put a longer sleeve on it? And do I like the neckline as is, or do I want to bring it up just a little bit closer to my neck? And I really can't make any of those decisions until the fabric has had the chance to relax. Now I could get a rough, and I mean rough, estimate by putting it on as it sits right now. And the sleeve's not too bad actually. It's maybe more of a 1980s style sleeve. If I uncurl the edge here and bring the top and bottom together, you'll see that it gathers just a little bit in that underarm. And those shoulders are just a smidge tight on me. So I think for the neckline, when all is said and done and I've got this all relaxed, I like the neckline right where it sits. So what I'll probably end up doing is just binding off this neckline. I'll just hang it back on the machine and bind it all off as one piece. And I'll show you how you can do that even though this is already put together at the shoulders. You can still do it on the machine. And I'm actually going to do an exposed seam on this down the sides and on the underarm. And I'm also going to do that on the machine, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But I like the fit on this. There's definitely enough room in it to be comfortable. I probably would have wanted it a little more fitted through the waist for me personally. But that's something that I can play with later by putting in some waistline darts or some bust line darts to pull it in a little bit, or even doing some waist shaping on another piece. So there are some options within the pattern structure itself. One of the things that I did want to talk about is the neckline that comes with this pattern. Because of the way the pattern prints out, you end up with this really narrow sheet that probably isn't going to fit in your knit radar or your knit contour. Now you could obviously glue this onto another piece of backing paper, and that would work, and it would run through just fine. But the alternate option is to actually use your gauge ruler and hold it up against the piece, and that'll tell you I need 11 stitches on either side of 0 to accomplish this. And then you can just measure from the top line down to your size to see how long you need it to do, and then figure that out based on your row gauge. And then you could actually graft your two ends together so that you don't really have a seam, which would make a very nice neckline. You know, you'd sew it on. I would probably do a join as you go. So as you're knitting the width of your neckline, you're hanging the live stitches that you have on your finished piece. And then your neckline's just going to fit a little bit nicer, and then you just fold it over either to the front or the back, depending if you wanted to cover the pickup stitches. You could use your neckline to do that, and it would work quite well, actually. And I still might do that. This kind of all depends on what happens when I block it. And I'm actually going to take you through the blocking process as well. So because this is a 50-50 blend of merino wool and silk, this would be a hand wash only piece. I would never put something like this in the washing machine. And this yarn comes pre-waxed, so it does have a little bit of something in it. This one's not as stiff as some of the other ones that I've gotten from this manufacturer. But I find that this particular yarn finishes best under a steam iron. So while I'll wash this later in the sink and lay it out flat to dry, for the purposes of getting everything flat so that I can seam it up, I'm going to use the iron to do that. So we're going to head over to my ironing board, and I'll show you kind of some do's and don'ts when you're using a steam iron on non-synthetic fibers. If you're going to iron acrylic, that is in your not best interest, in my opinion. It does kill it. It flattens the roundness of the yarn. Now you can get some really killer drape out of acrylic when you kill it, so I won't say that it's the worst thing that you can do. But you really, really, really want to experiment with some swatches first, just so that when you get to a full-size piece that you've done a few hours of work on, you're not in a position of possibly melting it or burning through. So do your homework first if you're working with acrylic. If you've knit in cotton, you can iron it. Cotton generally doesn't care. It takes a real high heat. But I find that the best way to block cotton is to simply put it in the washer and the dryer, and then iron it if you need to. I find that that's really the best option with acrylic as well, because getting acrylic wet and penning it out, it really doesn't care. It still curls. It doesn't really have any memory unless you apply some sort of heat. Alright, so we're over at the ironing board, and I'll apologize for the little bit of mess in the back. I'm not best known for my housekeeping skills. When it comes to my studio, I kind of have creative ideas laying all over the place, and I bounce from one to the next. And like most children, I don't always clean up the previous project. So my iron is all warmed up now. I use a Panasonic cordless iron. It comes with a base that heats it up. Kind of works like an old-fashioned iron, where you would put it on the hearth to warm it up and then use it and put it back. It does have a fairly good steam option on it, which is what I want. So when you press a piece, you kind of want to make a game plan before you start. With stockinette knitting, usually the top and the bottom, so your bind off and your cast on, tend to curl towards the knit side or the public side of the fabric, whereas your edges tend to curl to the non-public side or the purl side. So what I like to do is do that bottom edge or top edge first and get that nice and flat. Do the other end and then flip the whole piece over and do the sides. But it's really up to you. It's about where the most curl happens to be, and I have a fairly large amount of curl in this bottom here. So all I'm going to do is just kind of start on an edge and pull it out, and you want to pull your edge out just a smidge as well, just so that you don't press that under. Now obviously you can fix it when you come back. And I'm going to hold this edge, but I'm going to work a little more towards the center before I actually come out to that edge, just so that I don't accidentally put a big crease in this. Welcome, Maisie. Now the great thing about this particular yarn is because it's wool and silk, those both like a pretty high heat when it comes to an iron. So I'm still going to have a smidge of curl in this. Short of pinning this out and letting it dry overnight, it's just going to keep doing it. So I may end up putting a border on this depending on how long this sits to help with that curl. But for now I'm just going to roll with it. I don't mind a fluttery edge. I actually rather like it. So I'm going to roll over to this side. Now I'm going to do the neckline as well, even though I still have to do something with that neckline. But it's mostly so that I know what's actually happening with it. And because I used a... Oh, you know what? Haha. Because I used a around the gate peg bind off on both of these ends, I'm going to have a little more flutter on my edges, simply because that's such a loose bind off, which is going to lend itself to doing something a little decorative and pretty on that edge if I want to. And a lot of that just depends on how much I actually want to put into this piece. This for me is kind of a prototype, and yeah, it's in my size because I don't believe in making things that are not useful. And I'll wear it with the fluttery edge. I'll wear it with a little bit of curl. My style is all over the map, honestly. But I like my knitwear to have a little bit of that modern, almost messy feel to it. You know, I like my jeans distressed, but I like to distress them myself. I don't buy them that way. All of the holes in my jeans I come by honestly. Okay, so now I've flipped this over. And what I want to point out is I have, and you probably can't see it, I have this really odd seam here down the middle. I'm going to see if that presses out, and if not, I need to check my needles right around 0 because it looks like I might have a dodgy needle. Now, if you notice, I'm not stretching this as I go. You can certainly change the size and shape of a piece by stretching, but this one I don't really think I need to. So I'm not stretching it. And I can always change the size and shape a bit when I wet block this after I put my edges together. So I've got some time to figure it all out. A lot of it's going to depend on how it fits and how it's shaped and all of that. Because I didn't knit my actual size, I did a size that was much, much smaller than I am. Because there's almost 10 inches of ease in this pattern. And I really didn't want to feel like I was wearing a circus tent. I don't like my clothes that baggy. A little bit of bag is okay for me, but I like things slightly more fitted. Not seersucker, not second skin, but I do like my shape, and therefore I don't hide it. The one thing you do want to try and do is kind of keep your edges a little straight, so if you have to tug them into line, by all means do that. The machine stretches things very, very wide, so if this had just come off the machine, it would probably be wider than what it currently sits at, but because it relaxed overnight, it's not stretched quite as far as it would normally be. Alright, so getting into these sleeves here, I have to remember that they are larger than the rest of the piece. And to pull those out, and as you work up your edges, you'll notice that they start to just really uncurl and lay flat. And I'm not too worried about the body edges because those are going to get seamed up. But these sleeve edges, I definitely want to try and get fairly flat. Because it's the edge of the knitting, it likes to curl to the inside, and you don't want a sleeve that shortens itself by curling up against your arm. Alright, I'm going to deal with two things now. I'm going to deal with the slight puckering that's in these short rows where we joined our shoulders, and I'm going to deal with this neckline. Now, because my neckline is still on waist yarn, it actually makes this much, much easier to uncurl, because I can grab that waist yarn and pull it while I get the edge of the knitting. So my fingers are never in danger, so to speak. It's a little warm under there. There we go. There's that. And grab the other side. Now you could always use the narrow end of your ironing board and slide the neckline down over that and press it there. But because I don't have my side seams done, this looks like it's going to work quite well doing it this way. Alright, now the shoulder I think I want to put on the corner of the ironing board. Because it does have that short road shoulder, it has a slope to it. So giving it that slope that it wants to have when you're ironing it really helps. And I don't think you can see what I'm doing. Okay, let's move the camera a little bit. So what I've done, and you can see really well here, the seam down the middle is where I joined my shoulder, and that's where the short rows come together. I've still got waist yarn on here because when I did my cast on, I didn't separate my neck from my shoulders when I was doing the front. So that's going to cause just a little bit of resistance when I'm actually ironing this piece. And that's okay. Like I said, this is kind of a first run at blocking this. It's gonna have more done to it when all is said and done. But what I really want to make sure of is that this shoulder does have a bit of a slope to it, because it's just going to fit that much better if the slope is put in there. So when I pull this around, you can see there's no knobbiness or anything on there. And now I'm going to do the other side. Just flip it around and use the corner of your ironing board to spread those short rows out. It's harder to do it on a flat surface without some sort of angle helping you. But it's kind of another opportunity to get in there in that sleeve as well and open it up as much as possible. Now, as I said earlier, there is a cuff that you can put on this sleeve. So you could knit a cuff and attach it. So it'll almost look like a really relaxed drop sleeve shirt, which would probably be really, really cute. Now, alternately, and I may do this because I may do it to the bottom as well, you could take a bit of lace, in this case like a black ribbon lace, and sew that on your edge to give you the appearance of a longer sleeve, but add a little bit of femininity to something like this. And that would work really, really well. And if you follow through and do that on the bottom as well, it gives you a little bit of length. But again, it just gives you a little extra something in your piece. And then, you know what? I kind of like that idea. I think that is, in fact, what I'm going to do. And I'll do that after I join, because I'm going to do that on the sewing machine. And I will show you the process that I use when I do knits on a sewing machine, because there are some things to consider, and the worst thing in the world is thinking, oh, I can do this on the sewing machine, and then your sewing machine eats your sweater, and you end up with a really big hole, or you miss an edge because the edges are curling so badly. So there's some things, there's some tips and tricks that I can give you to make your machine sewing just a little bit easier and less frustrating. One of the things that I do want to do when I'm done with this is actually give this a quick measure and see what I actually ended up with, because by my calculations I should have about a 44-inch bust circumference. So this piece should be about 22 inches wide. And I'll convert those measurements to UK terms in just a second, as soon as I have my tape measure in my hand. Okay, that is all done. Turn her off, move my stand back down here, and grab my tape measure. If I can find it. There she is. Okay, so 22 inches is 55, looks like 55.9 centimeters. So let's see what I got after blocking, or after an iron. And I am at 22.25 inches, which is, looks like 56.5 centimeters. So I'm right where I want to be, honestly, because I'm going to lose a few stitches when I seam this up, which should put me right at that 44-inch circumference, which is also, let's see, that's 111.7 centimeters. So I'm thinking that that's pretty good. Again, I said in the beginning that you can play within the sizes, especially in modern patterns, because they tend to be baggier. So while you may be curvier and feel like you can't find something that works for you, while I'm not large, but I'm not tiny either. I'm that weird in between phase. I was able to make the extra small, which is a 44-inch bust, because this was designed to be very, very baggy. And you can kind of see it has a very boxy appeal to it, where there's not a lot of shaping. There's some neck shaping, and then you're just binding off your sleeves. Oh, I turned it off. Look at that. So that just needs a second. I've noticed I've got a little dimple here where I apparently didn't touch it with an iron. So I need to fix that. And then we're going to take this back over to the machine. We're going to do the side seams. And then I'm going to try it on. And I'm probably not going to show you what it looks like on me. Nothing against you. I just don't like being on camera. Alright, there we go. Got that little dimple out of there. If you're looking for a new iron, again, like I'm not a paid spokesman, but my old iron broke thanks to a cat that jumped up on my board and knocked it over, and I had to buy a new one. This one, the base is actually what heats it. This is what's plugged in. There's no power in the unit itself unless it's plugged into the base. It's got an automatic shutoff, which was good for me because, as my studio tells you, I'm not real good at paying attention to what's going on around me. I kind of bounce from one thing to the next. At least I know who I am. The steam output on it is very, very good. The cord does retract into the base, and it has a cover, so it has a carrying case, which is kind of neat. And I just found it on Amazon, and it was kind of funny because I was looking at irons, and my husband laughed at me because I was suddenly all domestic. And I asked him if it was weird that I was excited about a cordless iron, because when I'm ironing, you know, you tend to flip your iron every which way, and that cable can get in the way. But the way that this works is within the way that you iron anyways. Most of us do a small section and then we set the iron down, and then we move our fabric. So what this does is you set it down back on the base and it reheats while you're moving the fabric. And I haven't yet had a situation where I've run out of heat. So really cool product.